So, I've been sharing my story with you, how in the beginning I was diagnosed with my mental illness and how difficult it was, and I didn't think I could keep going on, and it was just really, really hard. And then I finally learned how to talk to the different personalities and parts, and I finally learned how to function, and I was doing all right some days. And other days, I would get triggered and hit with something, and I would feel like I was back where I was before, and I couldn't comprehend that. I'm like, I thought I was getting better. What is wrong with me? So I wrote a story, and I wrote a story just to explain my feelings because I like analyzing things. And my story is called The Choice is Mine, and I want to share that with you. I live in an ocean, a mass of unpredictability. Few days are as calm and peaceful as the tropical beaches seen on vacation advertisements. The ones where the tide slowly flows in and out, the breeze slightly blowing, and the waves so minuscule they're barely noticeable. Those are the days that I once longed for. Those are the days that only came forth in my dreams. Most of my life has been spent in a storm. The tides go in and out with the waves crashing along the shore. More often than not, a huge windstorm would blow so strongly that the waves became gigantic walls of water with a menacing power to drown any living thing. For the longest time, I clung to my board, barely hanging on. I once tried to sit on my board, but when the first wave came by, I was knocked off and swept under the water. It was safer just to hang on. And when the seas were the most turbulent, I felt I lived under the water. I would just barely get my face above the surface long enough to gulp down a mouthful of air, only to be dragged under by the next wave. I still tried to hang on to my board. It was easier to hang on to it than to tread water alone. I figured if I held on long enough, maybe I would eventually find myself floating in that fantasy land. You know, the place where the waters were calm, the place where the waves did not exist, the place where I could rest from being so weary. Yet each day I just found myself clinging harder to my board. It was exhausting being tossed to and fro by every wave that rolled by. Then one day I saw something I had never seen before. A little farther down the shore was another person, just like me. Only instead of hanging on the side of their board, they were standing. I couldn't believe my eyes. How could they do that? The waves were so big and so frightening, yet they didn't look afraid at all. I watched this person for a whole week. Some days the waves were so high I was certain that the person would stay in the water and cling to their board just as I did. However, they never gave up, not once. No matter what size the waves or how often they came, this person rode each one of them. They managed to stay above water 90% more than I ever did. Sure, occasionally they'd be knocked off their board by a wave, but it didn't keep them trapped under the water, and before I knew it, they were back on top of the waves. It was like watching the impossible, the unthinkable. One day I got up the courage to approach her. I asked her if she would teach me how to stand on my board so that I too could ride the waves. My first lesson began that day. In the beginning, it was almost useless, hopeless. I couldn't even sit on my board, more or less stand. Every time I tried, I would take a nosedive deep into the water. But with much encouragement, I would climb aboard and try again. This went on for days and on into weeks, and sometimes I was so discouraged. I felt I would never be able to ride the waves, to ride above the turmoil that surrounded me. How did she do it? Especially when the huge waves came. I continued to watch her each day, and soon I began to notice others around who could also ride the waves. I began to spend time with the others as well, and each taught me a different technique on how to stay on my board. After many long days and months of tedious hard work, I finally rode my first wave all the way without being knocked off. I couldn't believe it. I actually stayed above the water. I could feel the tumultuous churnings under my feet, instead of engulfing my entire body. It was a wonderful feeling. Discouragement soon set in when a huge hurricane swept over our area, and I spent the next week underwater more than above it once again. I felt like I was back at the beginning. I knew that I couldn't give up no matter how disappointed I felt. The taste of victory was too much to give up, and so I returned to practicing day after day. Each morning from sunup until sundown, I would climb upon my board and try to ride the waves. After a while, I was actually able to ride a few without being wiped out. I began to get stronger and found it easier to stay on my board. I realized, however, that even the slightest change in the wind or a small degree change in the temperature would once again throw me off balance. This was hard work. At the same time, I was realizing that the more time above water that I spent, the more enjoyable it was to be in the ocean. I stopped dreaming about finding that tranquil, still place, realizing that I would find that in the next life. I came to terms with the fact that right now, in this ocean, there would always be waves. I started to look forward to the waves, not that I enjoyed them all the time, but it was a good feeling to be above the turbulent waters rather than beneath them. I knew they would continue to come as I watched for them. I got really good at recognizing and distinguishing the easy waves from the more challenging ones. And as I was learning to ride the waves more and more, I began to notice others clinging to their boards, just as I had done not so long ago. I wanted so much to show them that it was possible to ride above the waves that seemed to devour them. Years later, I'm still learning, still practicing, still trying to get stronger and learn how to better ride the waves of this life that I lead. I hope I can be an encouragement to others, that no matter how high the waves are or how often they come, it is possible to learn to stay above them. There will always be moments in time that I will once again be knocked down, but that is why I stay close to those who taught me how to ride. When given two choices, tread water or learn to surf, I realized that I was born to surf.